Why don't you sit over there near the kitchen door less in the way? Jareth's voice cut across the clink of cutlery, pitched just loud enough for the whole table to hear. A couple of his relatives chuckled. I felt every eye turn toward me, scanning for my reaction, like it was part of the evening's entertainment. Melina kept her gaze fixed on her wine glass, swirling it slowly. She didn't say a word. My cheeks warmed, but I kept my expression smooth, forcing a polite nod as I moved to the chair he'd indicated, the one tucked almost into the wall, where the servers brushed past with trays. The dining room was crowded, the air heavy with the scent of roast lamb and garlic. Laughter and conversation tumbled over each other from the center of the table, but here at the edge, I could hear every clatter from the kitchen. Throughout the meal, Jareth tossed out little barbs like breadcrumbs. Corvina, you'd love this fish, it's affordable. Maybe next time we'll get you a chair with a cushion. I smiled when I had to, cutting my chicken in small, deliberate bites. Isolde sat 2 seats away. Her plate barely touched eyes, moving between me and her father. There was a sharpness in her gaze I'd noticed before, but tonight it was different, quieter, heavier. At one point, I saw her lower her head to her tablet fingers, moving quickly. By the time dessert arrived, a triple-layer chocolate cake, my appetite was gone. I folded my napkin neatly, laying it across my plate. The laughter around me felt far away, like I was underwater. When the evening finally ended, I kissed Melina's cheek, told Isolde good night, and stepped out into the cold air. My breath fogged in the darkness as I walked to my car. On the drive home, I kept my hands steady on the wheel, though my chest felt tight. This wasn't the first time Jareth had made me small in front of others. But tonight, something shifted. I could feel it like a change in the wind, quiet but certain. When I got home, I poured myself a cup of coffee and went straight to the safe under my drafting table. I set the coffee on my work table and knelt in front of the safe. The combination dial was smooth under my fingers, the numbers clicking into place from muscle memory. When the door swung open, the familiar scent of paper and metal rose up, steadying me. Inside, under a layer of rolled blueprints, was the red-labeled folder, Orion Penthouse Project. Registered copyright. I slid it out and placed it on the table. The weight of it was more than paper. It was years of my work, my vision, my name stamped in bold on every page. I flipped to the registration certificate, the embossed seal catching the light. My signature was there, dated 8 years ago, naming me as the sole copyright holder. I'd given Jareth's firm a one-time build license as a wedding gift, thinking it would help cement his career and, in turn, give Melina a stable life. I had never transferred ownership. Tucked inside the back pocket was a flash drive containing the original CAD files. Lorvin Hale, my attorney, had insisted I keep it safe. You never know, he'd told me, when goodwill will be mistaken for weakness. I thought about the articles I'd read lately, Jareth standing in front of glossy renderings, smiling for the camera, his name in bold type as the visionary architect behind the Orion expansion. Every line, every curve in those images was mine. Even the updated plans leaned so heavily on my original work, they might as well have been traced. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness grounding me. The humiliation at dinner had burned away whatever hesitation I'd once felt. This was no longer about being polite for the sake of family dinners. This was about reclaiming what was mine. I closed the folder carefully, slid it back into the safe, and locked it. My hands were steady now. Somewhere in the middle of the mocking laughter and Melina's silence tonight, a decision had been made. Tomorrow, I would call Lorvin. The next afternoon, I agreed to meet Melina and Jareth for lunch at a waterfront bistro. It wasn't my idea. Melina had texted that it would be nice to catch up, which I suspected was her way of smoothing over last night without ever acknowledging it. The place was bright, with wide windows looking out over the harbor. I chose a seat near the edge of the table, my back to the view, so I could watch them without distraction. Jareth arrived, late, sunglasses still on, talking loudly into his phone about locking in another investor. As soon as he sat, the conversation turned to his latest project. Two men at the table, clearly business contacts, leaned in while he gestured expansively. "We shaved over $100,000 off the costs," he said, grinning. "All thanks to my mother-in-law's old designs. Free work, you know." One of the men chuckled. "She must really like you." Jareth smirked. "Or just doesn't know her own worth." I kept my eyes on my bowl of clam chowder, stirring it, slowly feeling the spoon scrape the ceramic. I didn't trust my voice to stay, even if I spoke. The waiter brought a platter of lobster rolls, and the conversation shifted to upcoming property tours. Jareth mentioned that the penthouse units were already drawing pre-sale interest, that they'd upgraded certain features to match the market's appetite. I thought about the clause in my copyright registration. No reproduction, no derivative works without explicit permission. Every so-called upgrade was still sitting squarely on my foundation. Across the table, Isolde picked at her fries, her attention flicking between me and her father. Her brows knit slightly, as though she understood more than anyone realized. When the check came, Jareth tossed his card onto the tray with a flourish. "See, Mom, I take care of family too." I smiled faintly and took a slow sip of my water. In the architecture circle, I'd already heard whispers that his suppliers were growing impatient. I didn't need to say a word. When I left the bistro, the wind off the water was sharp, but my mind felt sharper still. That night, back in my apartment, I spread the stack of old photographs across my drafting table. Melina at 6, holding a paper model of a house I'd cut for her. Me in my hard hat on a construction site, hair flattened with sweat, the caption on the back in my handwriting, "Second job, night shift." I'd been a widow at 42, raising Melina alone while holding 2, sometimes 3 positions at different firms. Vacations were stories other people told. My reality was packed lunches and coffee refills at midnight. When tuition bills came due, I sold my mother's pearl necklace without hesitation. Every sacrifice felt like an investment in her future. When Melina married Jareth, I thought I was giving her another kind of security. As a wedding gift, I handed over a license to use my Orion penthouse plans for one build. No charge, no conditions beyond the legal boundaries of that document. Jareth had kissed my cheek, told me I was the most talented woman he'd ever met. I believed he meant it. Now, flipping through the pages of Portland Business Journal, I stared at a glossy spread of Jareth in a tailored suit, standing in front of an enlarged rendering of the Orion expansion. The headline read, "Visionary Architect Reshapes City Skyline." Not a single mention of my name. Not a single acknowledgement of the foundation he'd built on my back. I traced the printed lines of my own design, familiar as the bones in my hand. Every arch, every glass panel placement, every balcony curve, they were mine. My phone buzzed against the table, breaking the quiet. It was a message from Lorvin Coffee tomorrow morning. "We should discuss strategy." I set the phone down and looked back at the photograph of Melina with her paper house. The memory used to make me smile. Tonight, it sat heavy in my chest. By the time I turned off the drafting lamp, the decision was no longer about whether I could act. It was about when I would. Tomorrow I'd meet Lorvin, and the first move would be made. The cafe was quiet that morning, the smell of fresh coffee curling through the air as I slid into the booth across from Lorvin. He had the folder open before I'd even set my cup, down his glasses, perched low on his nose as he flipped through the documents I'd brought. "You've got him, Corvina," he said, without looking up. "This isn't just a technical infringement. It's deliberate. He's expanded on your design without authorization and monetized it. That's textbook willful violation. I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into my fingers. If we go forward, it'll hit him hard. It'll hit Melina, too. Lorvin finally looked at me. Sometimes you have to let people face the consequences they've earned. Protecting him now only teaches him that you're safe to exploit. I stared at the dark surface of my coffee. For years, I'd chosen silence to keep the peace. But peace had become one-sided, a truce I upheld alone, while Jareth chipped away at my dignity. He slid a draft letter across the table. We can issue a cease and desist immediately. Demand payment of retroactive licensing fees, public credit and damages. If he refuses, we escalate to litigation. He'll fold before it gets that far. He can't afford to lose investor confidence. I read the letter slowly, each word settling into place like bricks in a wall I was finally building for myself. Send it, I said. Lorvin's mouth twitched in a faint smile. I'll have it out within the week. Walking home, the cold wind off the harbor stung my cheeks, but I felt lighter with each step. This wasn't about revenge, it was about drawing a line and refusing to step back from it. That evening, I sat at my drafting table and began sketching, not for a client, not for Jareth, but for myself. Clean lines, strong angles, something new, untainted. When I finally set the pencil down, the room was quiet. The only sound the faint hum of the heater. I reached for the phone already knowing the next move I would make. 2 days later, I stopped by Melina and Jareth's condo with a tin of almond cookies. Melina greeted me at the door, smiling in that polite, guarded way she'd adopted since her marriage. Jareth appeared behind her phone in hand, finishing a call before stepping aside to let me in. We made small talk in the living room while I set the cookies on the coffee table. At one point, I pulled a single sheet of paper from my bag. Jareth, could you sign this for me? I'm sorting through old project files and need to confirm a few attributions for my records. He didn't even glance at the header before uncapping a pen. Sure, anything to help, he said, scrawling his signature with a flourish. I slid the page back into my folder without comment. It wasn't just a form, it was an acknowledgement that his current expansion used derivative work from my copyrighted design. Melina excused herself to check something in the kitchen. I stayed seated, sipping the coffee she'd brought me earlier when I felt movement beside me. Isolde had crept closer, holding a small notepad. She tore off a corner and pushed it into my hand without a word. In her neat, deliberate handwriting were 7 words. Dad laughs about you when you're gone. I looked at her, and she met my gaze with a seriousness far beyond her years. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into my pocket. Melina returned a moment later with a tray of fresh cups and more cookies. Jareth had wandered off toward his office, muttering something about emails. I stayed a few minutes longer, chatting lightly before standing to leave. As I stepped out into the crisp air, I felt the folded paper in my pocket and the signed document in my bag. Both were quiet weapons waiting for the right moment. By the time I reached my car, I already knew I wouldn't have to wait long to use them. It was late afternoon when my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Melina's number. I answered expecting her voice, but it was Isolde's whisper on the other end. "Grandma?" "I heard him again," she said, her tone clipped and urgent. "Dad told Mom, once this project is wrapped, we won't need her anymore." I closed my eyes, the words settling like stones in my stomach. "Thank you for telling me, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice even. "You did the right thing." We spoke for only another minute before she hung up, clearly afraid of being caught. I sat at my kitchen table, staring out at the pale winter sky. Every doubt I'd carried about whether I was overreacting had just evaporated. That evening, I caught a segment on the local news Jareth at a podium talking about the Orion expansion, as if it were his life's work. Behind him, an easel displayed a sleek rendering. I recognized every line, every proportion. The reporter mentioned that model units would soon be available for private tours, even though the building was still under construction. pre-selling a derivative work without the creator's consent. I almost laughed. He wasn't just stepping over the line, he was sprinting past it. I took the signed acknowledgement he'd given me from my folder, laying it beside the copyright certificate. Together they formed a paper trail even a rookie lawyer could follow. By the time the news segment ended, I'd already pulled up Lorvin's number on my phone. "We may have more leverage than we thought," I told him when he answered. "He's selling units that don't have a legal right to exist." Lorvin's voice sharpened. "Then it's time to tighten the net." When I hung up, the room felt unusually still. My coffee sat cooling beside me untouched. I picked it up, took a slow sip, and pictured the look on Jareth's face when he realized just how much rope he'd handed me. Lorvin moved quickly once he had the new information. By the next morning, the cease and desist letter was finalized, dense, with citations and conditions. It demanded an immediate halt to all construction marketing and sales tied to the Orion expansion, along with retroactive licensing fees and full public credit. If he ignored it, damages could triple in court. We agreed on timing. "You'll want this to land when it hurts the most," Lorvin said. "His investors should be in the room when he reads it." That opportunity came sooner than expected. An invitation arrived in my inbox from Jareth's parents, a dinner party at their home, honoring a few of his key business relationships. The guest list was a who's who of local developers, financiers, and city officials. I RSVP'd yes without hesitation. The day before the dinner, Lorvin arranged for the courier to deliver the letter at precisely 8 o'clock that evening. That way, Jareth would have no chance to intercept or deflect before everyone saw his reaction. On the night itself, I dressed, simply letting the documents in motion be my statement. When I arrived at the house, the air buzzed with conversation and the scent of roasted duck. I spotted Isolde near the sideboard balancing a plate that was too big for her hands. She gave me a tiny smile before returning her focus to the food. I kept my seat near the far end of the table, not speaking much, listening as Jareth held court at the head. He was mid-story about leveraging architecture for market dominance when the courier appeared at the doorway, envelope in hand. "Delivery for Mr. Jareth Corrin," the man announced. All eyes turned toward him. Jareth frowned, taking the envelope without thanks. He slid it open, scanning the first page. His posture stiffened. I lifted my glass, sipping slowly, while he flipped through the pages, the color draining from his face. The room seemed to contract around Jareth as he read. His voice, always ready to fill the space, was gone. One of the developers leaned in, curious. Something wrong? Jareth forced a tight smile, folding the letter halfway, as if that might make it disappear. "Just a minor misunderstanding," he said, but his tone lacked conviction. Across the table, Melina's brow furrowed. "What is it?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer. The investors were less patient. "If it's about Orion," one of them said sharply, "we need to know now." Jareth set the letter down beside his plate, but his hand lingered on it. "We'll discuss it privately." Lorvin's timing had been perfect. The air in the dining room shifted, small conversations stuttered to silence, replaced by the subtle weight of suspicion. Jareth's carefully cultivated image had a crack, and everyone could see it. I reached for a bread roll, breaking it in half, letting the faint sound fill the quiet. My heartbeat was steady. I didn't need to speak. The document was doing all the talking. Melina looked between him and me, her expression tightening, as she realized I wasn't surprised. "You knew," she murmured, but it wasn't a question. Jareth cleared his throat, trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground, but the questions kept coming. An investor asked about permits. Another wanted clarity on whether the designs were truly licensed. His answers grew, clipped, defensive. He kept glancing at me as though willing me to bail him out, but I only sipped my coffee, holding his gaze. When dessert was served, few touched it. The tension lingered, unspoken but heavy. Deals are built on confidence, and his was crumbling in real time. By the time the plates were cleared, whispers had begun in earnest. His investors would leave with doubts planted deep, and doubts were harder to erase than any line on a blueprint. I set my cup down, watching him avoid eye contact with half the room. The final piece was ready to fall into place. The evening was winding down when Isolde slipped away from her seat and crossed the room toward me. She clutched her tablet tight against her chest, her eyes set with a quiet determination I recognized. "Grandma," she said softly, "can I show you something?" She tapped the screen, and a short video began to play. Jareth's voice filled the space, clear, smug, unmistakable. "Once this project is wrapped, we won't need her anymore. She's just a free resource." Melina's voice followed a faint hum of agreement. I looked at Isolde, but she wasn't finished. She stepped forward, turning the tablet outward toward the table, and in a voice that carried through the room said, "This is what my dad thinks of my grandma." The room fell into a stunned hush. All conversation stopped. The clip played again, each word sinking into the thick silence. Jareth's face went white. Melina froze. One of the investors pushed back his chair, eyes narrowing. "That's how you talk about your design partner." This is taken out of context." Jareth stammered, but no one seemed convinced. I didn't rise. I simply reached for my coffee, cradling it in both hands. 5 words I murmured almost to myself, and the truth stands on its own. Isolde set the tablet on the table, leaving the video running. People began to gather their things, some offering me brief nods before heading for the door. The warmth in the room had drained away, replaced by a cold clarity that clung to every departing footstep. Jareth stayed seated, staring at the letter still folded by his plate, the tablet beside it like a sealed verdict. When I finally stood, Isolde slipped her hand into mine. We walked out together, the cool night air wrapping around us. I didn't need to look back to know the damage was done. By morning, the calls would start and the ripples would spread through his business, his marriage, his carefully built facade. I had no intention of stopping them.